How subconscious conditioning and childhood trauma affect your trading. You know what? Let me say the title of this lecture out loud one more time because I want it to land before we go any further. How subconscious conditioning and childhood trauma affect your trading. Now, I know what some of you just felt when you heard that. A slight resistance, maybe a quiet voice that asked or said, I don't have trauma, that's for other people. I just need to work on my discipline, or I don't need any of what's going to be provided here. Or I think I know enough about this topic. And I hear that, and I want to address it directly because the resistance itself, that resistance is part of what we're here to talk about. You see, trauma is not only what most people picture when they hear the word. It is not only the dramatic, visible, life altering events. No, trauma in the most psychological sense is any experience that overwhelmed your capacity to process it at the time it happened. Any experience uh, that left a mark on how you see yourself, other people, and the world. Any experience that taught your nervous system a rule about how to survive. And conditioning is even like broader than that. Conditioning is the set of beliefs, behaviors, and even the automatic responses that were installed in you by your environment before you were old enough to evaluate whether they were true or useful, whether they had any merit, if you will. Everyone, every single one of us in this Discord call has both. There are no exceptions. The question is not whether you were conditioned. The question is whether your conditioning is helping or costing you. Is it serving the version of you you're aiming to become, or is it not? So, welcome to the inner world of the trader. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where the real work lies. Now, so this lecture has two purposes. Both are stated simply on the slide, you can see, but I want to unpack them because they're more significant than they appear. The first is to reveal hidden psychology. Hidden psychology is not mysterious. It's not some fucking like esoteric concept that requires years of therapy to access. No, hidden psychology is simply the part of your decision making that operates below conscious awareness. The part that acts before you've had a chance to think. The part that has already decided before you open the chart how you're going to respond when the trade moves against you, when you're in drawdown, when you see red on that P&L. You felt this. You have known in a calm moment exactly what the right response to losing a trade is. Perhaps you probably written it in your journal or just mentally noted it. You've told other traders, you've described it clearly and rationally. And then the losing trade happened and you did something different. What you say is different than what you do. That gap between what you know and what you do, that's hidden psychology. It's not a knowledge problem. It's not that you don't know enough. It's not a discipline problem in the simplest sense. What it is the subconscious operating on instructions that override the conscious mind under pressure. That's what that is. So revealing it is the first step to changing it. The second purpose here of this lecture is to bridge the gap between what I would say your emotional history and your current market performance. This one is a little harder to accept because it requires believing that what happened to you at like what 12, 8, 9 years old, whenever you were, you experienced your conditioning or traumas, or 12 or 15, all of that stuff is showing up in your trading today. Not as a memory, but as a behavior, as a pattern of cope, as an automatic response that fires in the body before the rational mind has time to intervene and act accordingly. That connection is real. It is documented. And by the end of this session, I want you to be able to draw a straight line between something in your history and something in your charts. That line right there is where the real work begins. And that's exactly why I say this. And so, as I was saying, this is why I believe this is the most influential or the most valuable topic I'll touch as far as trading psychology. This is the root. This is where you find the root of what drives you psychologically to make the decisions you make, or the patterns, what influence the patterns in which you act upon that you don't even realize are affecting who or what you're trying to emulate in this business. So, why does this topic matter? I want to talk about why this matters from a practical standpoint, because some of you are here and still wondering if this is relevant to you as a trader. So I want to address that directly. You see, trading is not 80% psychology and 20% strategy by accident. That number exists because the data backs it. Traders with sound strategies, they fail constantly. The best strategies still failing. It's not because the strategy is wrong, but because the person executing the strategy is operating on a psychology that undermines the execution. That's the best way I can put it. And so, an impaired mind does not execute a sound strategy. It takes the sound strategy and filters it through fear, ego, trauma, conditioning, and produces something unrecognizable by the time it reaches the market. That's what happens. Most traders don't even know this is happening. Most of y'all don't know. You think you have a strategy problem. You think you need a better system. So you go looking for a new setup, a new indicator, a new framework, a new mentor. And so you add layers to the process. You invest in some more education, and still the same psychological patterns fire, the same mistakes repeat, the same account drawdown happens. This is the cycle. That, you see, that cannot be broken at the strategy level because it doesn't exist at the strategy level. And that's what I'm here to prove to you today. The majority of you fail due to psychological barriers. Majority of traders as a whole. It's not market conditions, it's not bad luck, it's not a lack of technical knowledge, it's psychological barriers, most of which have roots that go back long before you ever placed your first trade. The path to becoming the part of the small percentage of traders who succeed runs directly through the inner world. There's no route around it, only through it. And there's the quote on this slide that I want to sit with for a moment. You can see it at the bottom here. And it's because it's not decorative either. You see, let me read it right here. Every candle on the chart is a reflection of belief. To master the market, one must first master the self. Every candle, not some candles, not the emotional ones. Every single candle that has ever been printed on any chart you have ever traded was placed there by a human operating from a belief system about money, about risk, about themselves, about whether they deserve to win. And every trade you place is the same. It carries your beliefs whether you intend it to or not. Mastering the market starts with mastering the belief system behind a trade. And that belief system has it has a history, it has a source, it has a childhood, it has a conditioning. So let me think about how to approach this here. So before we get into the specific patterns, how the subconscious mind operates, I want to get into this mechanism. Understand the mechanism, because understanding how the subconscious operates is what makes everything that follows make sense, not just from an intellectual perspective, but in a way that you can feel what I'm saying. The subconscious mind operates below the level of conscious awareness. That's pretty common knowledge. This is not a metaphor. It's neurologically, the subconscious processes an enormous amount of information. It's responsible for 95% of daily behavior reactions. Sensory data, emotional signals, pattern recognition. It acts on these things faster than the conscious mind can even register what's happening. It's not like you're consciously breathing at this moment. 9 times out of 10, you're just breathing without knowing it. 9 times out of 10, you're just blinking without knowing it. You don't even know your lips is dry. Watch you try to lick your lips. So what happens here is you're by the time you're consciously in a trade, or by the time you're consciously aware of a feeling in a trade, the subconscious has already generated that feeling. It already initiated a physiological response, and in many cases, already pushed you towards a behavior. It's edged you there or inclined you there. The conscious mind often arrives after the fact, after the impulse has already been acted on, and then constructs a rational explanation for what was actually an emotional reaction, an impulsive reaction. This is why some of y'all say things like, "Oh, I knew I shouldn't have take that. I knew I shouldn't have taken that trade, but I did it anyways." That's because the conscious mind knew, but the subconscious mind had already decided before you did. The subconscious stores emotional memories and belief systems formed throughout your life, with the heaviest weighing given to early emotionally significant experiences. And that's critical there. The brain does not treat all experiences equally. Experiences that carry strong emotion, especially fear, shame, guilt, helplessness, threat, those are essentially more encoded more deeply. They're recalled more easily and triggered more quickly than neutral memories, which means that the emotional experiences of your childhood, the ones that felt the most significant, the most threatening, the most formative, those are the ones most likely to be activated when the conditions in your current environment resemble them closely enough, when they trigger them closely enough. There's a gap to be bridged there. Every a matter of fact, no. The market creates those conditions constantly. These conditions where there's uncertainty, there's risk, there's potential loss, there's potential gain, there's judgment in the form of money, the possibility of failure, there's the possibility of success and what that means about you from an identity level. You see, every one of these conditions has a psychological equivalent in most people's developmental histories. And when the market presents that, the subconscious does not ask, "Oh, is this actually threatening?" The subconscious asks, "Does this feel like what was threatening before?" It correlates to past experiences, it bridges the gap. And so, if the answer is yes, then that's when the old programming fires. And this is where you get patterns. Your nervous system is running a program that was written a long time ago. The market just keeps pressing play on that pattern, on that program. The subconscious is also responsible, again, for the vast majority of our daily behavior and reactions. Not a small fraction, but the majority, which means most of what you do in a trading session, most of what any of us do on any given day, is not consciously chosen. It's just done. It's automatically generated by patterns that are running beneath the surface, routines. And so what I've come to see is like the implication of this for trading is it's quite profound. If you have not done the work to identify and interrupt those patterns, then you are not trading from your strategy. You're just trading from your history. That's a bar. That's a bar. So now that I've kind of explained the mechanism, I hope I explained it in a way that was pretty digestible. I do want to get into the different kinds of conditionings and traumas. First off, we have the fear of failure. I want to move through each of these with real depth because for each one, I want you to not just understand the concept, but recognize yourself in it. This pattern being the fear of failure, the childhood root here was that you were punished for mistakes, or you were only praised when you performed perfectly. There was love, warmth, approval, acknowledgement. These things were present in your environment, but they were quite simply conditional. They were conditional. They arrived when you succeeded. They were withdrawn, or the environment became tense or cold, emotionally unavailable when you failed. What this taught you at what this taught you at a at a cellular level, what this taught you was that failure is dangerous, not uncomfortable, not disappointing, but dangerous. A threat to connection, a threat to safety, a threat to being seen as worthy. And that wiring does not stay in childhood. No, it follows you into every arena where failure is possible, including the market. That shit ain't no exception. And so here's where it shows up in the market. The impact. You avoid placing trades despite having valid setups. Not because the setup isn't there, but because placing the trade means potentially being wrong. And being wrong at a neurological level activates it activates the same threat response as the childhood experience of being punished for a mistake. So the body essentially says, yo, don't risk it. Then you also hesitate on your best setups. The A plus setup, the one you trained for, the one you've seen work repeatedly, that arrives. And instead of executing immediately and cleanly, you freeze. You wait for one more confirmation, then another. Then the move is half over before you even enter, or you miss the entire move. You miss it entirely. This is not a strategy failure. What that is a fear response. What you also do, or may do, is you exit trades too early. The trade is in your favor. It has room to run. Your plan stays. Your plan says to stay. But the moment a candle pulls back slightly, the discomfort becomes too much all of a sudden. Because staying in a winning trade means it could still turn into a loss because the trade ain't over. And the loss in this pattern, for this pattern, is catastrophic. Very painful, very uncomfortable. So you close the trade, you take the small wins, you protect yourself from the possibility of failure, and you watch the trade go exactly where you plan, where the plan said it would. And it goes there without you. What you also do or have a tendency to do is you freeze in analysis paralysis. Too many scenarios, too many potential outcomes, too much evaluation. Because if you just think about it long enough, maybe you can find the trade where failure is impossible. But let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, there is no such trade. But the mind continues to look because the cost of being wrong feels too high. The fear of failing has become stronger. For those who experience this, what you'll notice is that the fear of failure has become stronger than the desire to win. And a trader who's trying not to lose is a completely different trader, executing a completely different strategy than a trader who is trying to execute their edge. The market cannot tell the difference between a good trader and a fearful one by just fucking like looking at the chart. But the chart can tell the difference though. The pattern of hesitation, early exit, and missed setups, they're written there. And they're not market patterns, they're childhood patterns wearing a trading costume, and you don't have the awareness to place the difference, to spot the difference. Does this make sense? Fear of failure. For those of you who experienced this, this one, I had to go first for this one because this applies to me. I've experienced this. And so I see where my fuck up lies through this childhood conditioning. So that's fear of failure. Here, you have low self worth. The childhood root here, for this second pattern known as low self worth, you experience emotional neglect, or the persistent feeling of not being good enough, or being enough at all. Not dramatic neglect in every case, sometimes it is subtle. An emotional environment where your emotional needs were constantly overlooked, they weren't valued, where you felt invincible, where accomplishment was expected and acknowledged, but the person underneath the accomplishment was never really seen or cherished. What this installs is a foundational belief that's held beneath conscious thought that you are not inherently worthy, that worth must be earned, that it must be demonstrated, it must be proven, it must be produced, and that without constant evidence of value, the baseline feeling is not enough. You being you, just existing, is not enough. And so in trading, this becomes one of the most destructive patterns there is because, you see, how I put it, the market is a place where worth can feel like it's being quantified in real time. Every trade is a performance review. Every loss is a statement. And for a person carrying this wound, those statements cut far, far more deeper than the dollar amount suggests. So here's what it looks like in the charts. Here's the trading impact here. First, over trading. Taking trades beyond your defined session, beyond your setup criteria, beyond your max daily count. Not because you see edge, but because sitting out feels like not producing. It feels like not earning your place, your keep. Feels like being someone who isn't doing enough. And so the account must be active because inactivity feels like worthlessness. Then you experience, or you may have a tendency to experience irresponsible position sizing, just sizing up beyond the defined risk parameters, the parameters you set, not from calculated confidence, but from urgency to prove something to yourself, to produce a number significant enough to feel justified, to make the account reflect a level of performance that matches the internal pressure to be worth something. And the thing is, that pressure always exists. This is one of the fastest ways accounts get blown. It's not because you lack knowledge of risk management, but because the internal pressure to prove your worth overrides the knowledge. It overrides the strategy. It overrides the system, the plan. Also, you have quitting after losses, and you frame them as personal failures. Understand something, a loss is a data point. But for a trader carrying low self-worth, a loss is a verdict. It's an indictment. It confirms the fear that was always there. It becomes evidence for the story that was already running before you ever placed a trade. And when a loss becomes a verdict, the options are to quit, to remove yourself from the arena where you can be judged, which is here in the market, or to escalate, to fight back, to revenge, to prove the verdict wrong through increasingly reckless behavior. Both are responses to the same root, and neither serve you as a trader. Neither serve optimal execution. Optimal execution is the cause of the effect of profitability. You want to get to profitability? Profitability isn't where you worry. Where you worry is your execution. What influences your execution? Patterns like this: low self-worth, fear of failure, and I'm going to get to the rest of the patterns. The account balance is not a measure of your worth. It never was. But until that's felt in the body, not just understood in the mind, the trading behavior will keep trading. Your trading behavior will keep treating it as one. Next, you got people pleasing, validation seeking. This third pattern, it's particularly, what's the word? I would say it's particularly insidious in the current trading landscape, the space, because the infrastructure for it has never been more available than it is now. The childhood root here is that you learn that approval came from pleasing others in your environment. The path to safety, to love or acknowledgement that ran through other people's satisfaction. Your needs, your own needs, your preferences, and judgment, that was secondary. What mattered was whether the people around you, the authority figures, the parents, the whoever your authority, what's the other word? Your guardian was. The unpredictable parent, the demanding household. That stuff is what mattered. If they were pleased with you. And so what this installed is essentially a fundamental distrust of your own judgment. A nervous system that feels calmer when external voices confirm what you're thinking than when you act alone. And then you also develop a compulsion to constantly seek approval, not as a preference, but as a psychological need. Somebody gotta confirm this shit. And trading, this shows up in a way that would be almost funny if it weren't so expensive psychologically. First one is you share every trade online, not to educate, not to document, but to seek a response, the like, the comment, the validation from other traders saying, good call, or I see it too. Nice. This provides the nervous system with the external confirmation it never learned to generate internally, so it seeks it from others. When that validation comes, it feels like permission to continue. When it doesn't, when that validation doesn't come, the doubt intensifies. You doubt your plan when others disagree. Then on top of that, you've done your analysis. The setup is there. Your process, the way you trade your process or your system, it says, oh, this is a valid entry. And then someone in the Discord, in the main chat room, wherever, they say, oh, they see it differently. Or a Twitter trader says the market is going the other way. You see Soire post something saying the market is going the other way. Or any guru whose opinion you follow, they post a counter thesis or bias. And then suddenly your own analysis dissolves. It holds no weight. And it's not because they provided better evidence, but because their disapproval, even implied, activates the old program that you need the validation in order to feel as if it's permission to continue with your bias or your trade. This is a direct undermining of trading edge because edge requires independence. That's just quite simply what it is. It requires the ability to act on your own analysis even when no one else agrees, even when the room is quiet, even when there's no external voice validating the decision. The sixth law of Soire says noise is the enemy of mastery. The fewer voices we follow, the louder our intuition becomes. So for any of you who need external validation before every trade has no trading independence, you're not trading your system. You're trading consensus. And consensus is not an edge. Consensus is just noise. The validation seeker isn't weak either. They're just running a program that kept them safe as a child. The work is to build enough internal evidence through process, through review, through accumulated proof that the external or the internal voice becomes trustworthy enough to not require external backup, to not require validation. Also, you have abandonment issues. This is the fourth pattern. And this is the one worth sitting with carefully because it manifests in the market in ways that are both quite specific and devastating. The childhood root is you had emotionally unavailable caregivers, guardians, inconsistent care, a parent or a primary figure who was sometimes present and sometimes not, physically, emotionally, or both. An environment where the people you depend on could not be reliably counted on, where connection was available but it wasn't stable, where love was real but it was unpredictable. What this wires into the nervous system is that an extreme intolerance for things leaving, an inability to accept loss as natural, a compulsion, a pattern, but really a compulsion to just hold on, to wait for the return, even when the rational mind knows it's not coming. In trading, this is, for me, or for anybody, I would say this is one of the most clearest patterns in the charts. Holding on to losing trades or losing biases. The position is clearly against you. The stop has already been hit, or the setup has been invalidated. Every technical element says the trade is done, but you don't close it. You hold. You watch it go further against you. You add to the position. You tell yourself it will come back. This drawdown just temporary because closing the trade means accepting that it's not coming back. And for someone carrying abandonment trauma, the act of accepting that something is gone, definitively, finally gone, that's not a simple trading decision. It's a reactivation of the original wound. The thing left, and you're waiting for it to return. Abandonment issues. This is why traders hold losing positions for hours, days, weeks, if the margin is even there, but long past any rational justification. You're not being irrational as a trading decision. You're just being completely consistent with a psychological pattern that was formed in a context where holding on and waiting was sometimes rewarded. Being attached, holding on was sometimes rewarded. What you also experience here is FOMO driven decisions. The fear of missing out at its root is a fear of being left behind, of being excluded, of the move happening without you. And the implicit meaning that carries, you see, for a person carrying abandonment issues or conditioning, the trade that moves without them is not just a missed opportunity. It's another abandonment. It's another departure. It's another leaving. And the urgency to chase, to enter at any price on any signal just to be in that move or just to be in the chart, in a trade, that's the same urgency that develops in a child who has learned that things leave without warning. You don't want to be abandoned by the move. That's all. You develop over attachment to one ticker or setup. The trader who can only trade one instrument, who becomes emotionally fused with a specific setup, who treats the market as a relationship rather than a tool. This is abandonment conditioning, wearing a very specific trading mask, a very niche trading mask. It looks like focus from the outside looking in, but you can see it's a very, how I say, traumatically intimate relationship between them and the market. The attachment provides the consistency that the childhood environment did not. You see, you cannot hold on to a trade that needs to leave. You cannot chase a move that has already gone. The market does not return because you need it to. And until the holding and the chasing, the attachment stop being about something older than the trade, then the patterns will keep appearing in the data. There will always be fluctuations. There will always be very high probabilities of blown accounts. Does that make sense? For those of you who may relate to abandonment issues, that's something worth sitting down with, thinking about. And so here's the fifth pattern, that's emotional suppression. And this one is particularly important to understand because it tends to be invincible for longer than the others. It tends to be behind the surface, or, yeah, just behind the surface longer than the others, and its consequences tend to be more sudden and more severe. The childhood root here is that it was not safe to express emotion in your environment. Maybe the expression of emotion was met with ridicule or punishment or dismissal, or an overwhelmed caregiver who couldn't hold space for it, who did not have the capacity. Maybe you learned that expressing what you felt made things worse, that the way to survive was to simply be quiet, to contain, to bottle up, to present a surface that didn't disturb the environment. Keeping the peace, and not for nothing, I get it. As a kid, I get it. For any of these patterns, you can't really blame yourself for it. And that's not even the thing to do because it kind of perpetuates the emotional charge of the pattern. You meet yourself where you could understand yourself. What this installed here, emotional suppression, is a nervous system that suppresses emotional processing as a default, that pushes down what it felt instead of moving it through, processing, that stores what cannot be expressed, that builds pressure over time and eventually, inevitably, releases in ways that bypass conscious control. This is where you get the crash out. In trading, this is the pattern behind some of the most destructive single session events you will ever see in anyone's journey. The trader who doesn't journal or review because doing so requires acknowledging what was felt. The emotional content of a bad session, the frustration, the self judgment, the fear, the shame, that stays bottled up, locked inside. It doesn't disappear, it just accumulates, it sits beneath the surface. And then it slowly increases the baseline charge that you carry into every subsequent session. So then you have the unexpected crash out days, the unexpected blow ups, a week of contained sessions, no obvious pattern, everything was cool, and then one day, often following a streak of small losses on an otherwise normal morning, that's when the fucking lid just comes off, you crashing out. A series of trades, they're just placed in like rapid succession. There's the size, risk that makes no rational sense. Rule after rule is broken in a single session. Those of you who experience this often, you say that, oh, you don't know what happened. You felt fine, and then suddenly you weren't. The lid just came off, and you just felt as if you were possessed. Yo, something took over me. I wasn't even in control no more at that point. I was just crashing out. I don't even remember all the way what happened type shit. All I know is I felt the way I lost and I lost it. I lost this trade and I lost it internally. What happened is that the accumulated, suppressed, and emotional content, the weight, the baggage from days, weeks, sometimes months of unprocessed experience, that's reached a threshold, a certain, like it's reached the top of the meter, and that discharged through the behavior. The market was the outlet because suppression had blocked every other outlet. Emotional suppression, trying to keep the peace, or just not expressing, not allowing your emotions to move through and instead containing them. They will leave. They will be expressed one way or another. So if you're not going to express them by way of acknowledging them, then if you're going to neglect them, then they're going to make their presence known through your behavior on days like this where you have unexpected blowups. And like emotional numbness is the other side of this. This is some of you who can no longer feel excitement or pain, who go through the motions of trading in a very disassociated state. This is the nervous system last line of defense against emotional overwhelm. It simply just shuts the system down entirely. And a numb trader is not a calm trader. Don't get it fucked up. Calmness is regulated. Numbness is suppressed. They look similar from the outside, but they are fundamentally different states with fundamentally different outcomes. Listen, let me tell you something. What you push down doesn't disappear. It builds, and it will find a way out. You trying to trap your emotions, cage them up, put them in a prison. They gon' El Chapo and find a way out. The only question is whether the way out serves you or costs you. There's a law I could probably associate with this. The third law of Soire is relevant. I would say this is relevant here in its deepest form. It goes as emotion is observed, not obeyed. But observation requires that the emotion is allowed to rise up to the surface, that the emotion be allowed to surface. You see, you cannot observe what you have trained yourself not to feel. The practice of observation is only available to the trader who has first given themselves permission to acknowledge what is actually present, the emotion. And that be the hardest part for those who suffer from emotional suppression, because you're so used to consciously or unconsciously bottling shit up, pushing shit down. So much so that a good portion of emotional suppressors go numb. The entire system has shut down. Now, I believe I said enough for emotional suppression. The sixth pattern, perfectionism. I would say this one is widely misunderstood because it's often framed as a positive trait, an honorable trait, something to be proud of, a sign of high standards, a marker of ambition. But let me tell you, it's not. It's a wound wearing a respectable disguise. The childhood root here is that you were only rewarded when perfect. Flaws weren't tolerated. The bar was set at a level that allowed no margin for error. And anything short of that bar was met with some form of punishment, whether explicit or the cold withdrawal of approval or the persistent implicit message that what you produced was never quite enough. They asked A plus and you got A minus and that wasn't tolerated. Or your room had to be squeaky clean and you left your motherfucking PS4 remote misplaced somewhere and that wasn't tolerated or something. Them dishes had to be clean, squeaky clean. You left one in the sink, or you kind of rushed through some of them, and some of them one of them had a little stain that wasn't tolerated. What this installs is a relationship with imperfection that's not functional, an inability to tolerate the natural, the inevitable. That statistically certain reality that in trading and life that things will not always go as planned. You see, setups will be imperfect, entries will be early or late, trades will be valid and still lose. Like niggas can do everything right and still lose. And for the perfectionist, each of these imperfection is not a data point. It's a failure, and failure is not acceptable by the perfectionist. In trading, this pattern creates specific and identifiable destruction. One, it creates strategy obsession. The perfectionist trader is never done with their system, even when it works, even when the back tests are solid. The forward testing is clean, the logic is sound, the system is there, it's complete. There's always one more thing to adjust, there's always one more variable to optimize, one more condition to refine. Because what exists is not perfect, and trading an imperfect system feels like failure before the trade even begins. Trading feels like failure before the imperfect system feels like failure before the trade even begins, before it's even ever entered into. This is one of the primary drivers of the constant system switching, just strategy hopping that kills accounts and it kills compounding. And it's because it's not because each new system is bad, but because no system ever gets the execution time necessary to prove itself, to show its true edge, its compounding effect. Sorry. Because the perfectionist abandons it the moment it shows an imperfection. Knowing that things will not always go as planned. Again, setups will be imperfect, entries will be early or late, trades will be valid and still lose. But again, the perfectionist does not accept that. That feels like failure because it's imperfect. Analysis paralysis from a different root than the fear of failure pattern. You see, the perfectionist doesn't freeze because they're afraid to be wrong. No, they freeze because the setup in front of them is not textbook. There's a slight a slight imperfection, or for lack of better terms, a lack of or a slight ambiguity. There we go. A candle that doesn't close exactly right. A confluence that's 90% of what they want, but not 100. And 90% is not acceptable, so the trade does not get taken, and the market moves without them. Again, the market does not offer perfect setups. The market offers probability. The trader waiting for certainty is waiting for something that the market fundamentally, constitutionally, is incapable of providing. Perfectionism in trading is not a high standard. What it is simply a defense mechanism against the pain of imperfection, the failure of imperfection, and the only way through that is to build a relationship with good enough. not as a lowering of standards, but as a realistic relationship with the nature of the game. Good process, clean execution, discipline, managed risk, consistent execution or application. That is the standard, not perfection. Understand that? So, the seventh pattern here is impatience and the need for instant gratification. And this one has become more prevalent, not less. In a world that has structurally rewired the dopamine system toward immediate reward. The childhood root here was that there was no boundaries and no consistent reward systems. An environment without clear structure, where delayed gratification was never modeled, where the experience of working towards something and receiving it at the right time was absent, or an environment that was chaotic enough that waiting never paid off because what you waited for often didn't arrive. So waiting became useless. What you needed it, and you need it now. Or what you wanted, you needed it, and you needed it now. And that's all you knew. You didn't know delaying, working towards something and receiving it at the right time. And what this installs is a nervous system that is deeply uncomfortable with delay, that interprets waiting as a form of deprivation, that experiences the gap between desire and fulfillment as something to be collapsed as quickly as possible by fucking any means necessary. ASAP. In trading, this is the pattern that sits behind some of the most common and costly behaviors in this game. One being the premature entry. The setup is developing, it's 90% there, the signal is not confirmed, the condition has not been, how do I say, fully met. But the waiting is intolerable. The body is already activated. The position is already mentally open, and the entry goes in before the plan says it should. Not from a read of the market, but from the inability to sit in the discomfort of not yet. This is different from perfectionism. It, it comes from two different places. The perfectionist doesn't get in the premature entry or the premature the setup as it's not fully complete because they don't want to get in the setup if it's not perfect. The person who lies under impatience and instant gratification takes the premature entry from a place of they can't wait. You also over leverage to speed up results. The natural pace of compounding is just too slow. The account growth is real, but it's not fast enough to satisfy the urgency. So the size goes up, not from a calculated assessment of edge and probability, but from the need to accelerate, to get there faster. You see everybody else making 10K, 12K, 20K a month. And because your little 2,000 a month from trading ain't enough, or it ain't as fast or immediate as their results, you sizing up all of a sudden just to, from a comparison standpoint. You need to be where they at and you need it now. You won't allow yourself the time to allow your strategy to compound, its effects to compound. And so this is one of the most, how do I say, it's one of the most reliable account destruction mechanisms there is. And it's almost never diagnosed correctly. Like, you as a trader think you're being aggressive. You're being impatient. And impatience and sizing is not aggression, it's just a nervous system response to the intolerable discomfort of delay, of waiting. Also, experience early exits. Early exits from valid trades. The trade is working, the plan says to hold, but holding means continuing to wait, and continuing to wait is the discomfort that was already intolerable before the entry. So the exit comes early. Not from a read of the market, not from a change in the setup, but from the need to resolve the open loop, to close the position, to make the uncertainty stop. Then also, like those who super scalp, knowing how risky it is, and you can see like there's instant gratification, or those who are affected by this quality. Not quality, but this pattern. You'll see people who trade small second charts, and it's not from a place of actually trying to trade better or because there's edge that lies there or high probability that lies there. It's not for the sake of the strategy in itself, but more so lack of patience. Get in quick, get out quick. Patience, understand something. Patience isn't passive. Patience is one of the most active, most demanding psychological practices any of you can engage in. It requires sitting with the discomfort of the open position, the uncertainty of the developing setup, the gap between where you are and where the trade might go, and not collapsing that gap through immediate action. For for those of you whose nervous system learned that waiting is dangerous, that reward is not reliable, that the only way to get what you need is to take it now, patience is not just uncomfortable. It's a direct confrontation with a deeply held survival belief. But understand something, it can be changed, but not by trying harder to be patient, but by understanding why patience is hard and doing the work at the root level, not the surface level. The eighth pattern here is learned helplessness. I'm just kind of trying to catch my breath and, like, okay, assess how I'm gonna attack this here. This one requires particular care in the naming because it's not weakness, and I don't want you to get that idea that it is. It's adaptation. It's what a highly intelligent system does when it's been placed in an environment where its action did not reliably produce results. The childhood root here is that there was some sort of authoritarian parenting or an environment that was too sheltered, too controlling, too strict, a context where independent thought was discouraged. You couldn't think for yourself, where the child's own judgment was consistently overlooked, or, matter of fact, overridden is a better word, where self trust was not developed. And that's because the message, whether it was explicit or implicit, was always, you don't know, so let someone else decide. Follow the authority. Follow the authority. Submit type shit. I'm trying to see if there's a better way to put that. That's the best way I can put it. But what this installs is a fundamental distrust of the self as a shot calling entity. Distrust in your ability to make decisions. Or, yeah, that's the best way I could put it. A nervous system that looks outward for answers before and often instead of looking inward. And this can be kind of cross cross combined with validation seeking in some ways. In most ways actually. But it also instills a person who has learned that their own judgment is insufficient and that safety lies in following someone else. The answers are from someone else. That's where safety is. In trading, this is the pattern that keeps the trading space populated with followers and depletes the number of independent thinkers. This is what populates the signal chats. The gurus who just sell signals and shit. And so what you develop here is you cannot take trades without external confirmation first. The analysis is done, the setup is there, but it quite never feels safe enough until someone else confirms it. Another trader, another chat room, a guru, a signal service, a mentor, Romel, Sai, Zeke, whoever. The external confirmation is not sought because it adds information. No, it's sought because because your own judgment does not feel trustworthy. Because a childhood of being told your judgment was insufficient, it wasn't valued. It left a residue that says, oh, you don't know. Check with someone else first before doing anything. Too much dependency, guru dependency. Those of you who move from mentor to mentor, system to system, strategy to strategy, community to community, never staying long enough with any one approach to develop your own voice, your own read, your own edge, because developing a personal edge requires trusting your own perception over time. And for those of you who with learned helplessness, your own perception is the one source you've learned not to trust. You've never learned to trust your own judgment. It's quite simply what it is. The ethics of control, which I've written about a year ago, it says to worry about what is not mine is to forget what is. To value what I cannot command is to betray what I can. So the trader caught and learned helplessness is living in the opposite of this. You're overly focused on external forces, seeking their guidance or seeking your guidance, attributing your failures to them, to the gurus, anchoring your decisions to them, while systematically neglecting the one variable you actually have command over, which is yourself. It becomes easy to blame when someone else made the decision for you. And that's part of this pattern of learned helplessness. It's also a way to cope with accountability. When you can just give the responsibility to someone else. You don't have to fail when it was someone else's fault. When the option is there to blame externally. The path out of learned helplessness is the slow, uncomfortable, deliberate process of building self-trust through small decisions made independently, through predictions tested and reviewed, through through a track record of personal judgment that accumulates enough evidence to begin overriding the original installation. You see, that takes time and it requires solitude with the decision making process, learning to decide for yourself. But the best part is it is entirely possible. So that's learned helplessness. I tried to explain that in the best way I possibly could with what I know about learned helplessness at the moment. You see, I knew it. You see, there's a few of y'all like, oh, that's me, this is me, I see that in myself. Most of y'all have at least one of these patterns. And it's okay. This is where you learn to gather awareness of these things. The ninth pattern here is a lack of boundaries. And in trading, this is perhaps the most structurally dangerous pattern of all of them, because boundaries are the architecture of a sustainable, a consistent process. Without them, there is no process. There's only a series of reactions, a series of happenings, perhaps mishaps. The childhood root here is you've grown up in a boundless upbringing, an environment without clear structure, without consistent rules, without respect for emotional or personal space, an environment where things were fluid and unpredictable, where the lines between acceptable and unacceptable were never clearly drawn. Clearly drawn, keyword. Or they were drawn and then ignored or changed without warning. And so, what this installs is you become a person who does not have, how I say, that does not have an internalized sense of what the limits should be, who does not feel the natural stopping point that a healthy relationship with structure provides, who, when placed in a high stake or a high stimulus environment like a market, does not know when to stop. Not because you lack the intellectual knowledge of where the line is or the limit is, but because the felt sense of a limit, the internal experience of this is enough, this is where it stops, that right there was never developed nor exercised. So in trading, this produces a specific and recognizable, very recognizable destruction pattern. First off, is you can't walk away after a bad trade. The session is done or the trade is done. The strategy, the system says to stop. The process says to stop. But you keep going. One more trade, one more attempt, one more chance to resolve the session on different terms, to end it off on different terms. Perhaps a W. Last minute clutch W. There's no natural stopping point because stopping was never modeled. It was never taught. It was never felt. It was never enforced properly. Then you keep trading to make it back. This is the revenge trade in its most structurally, brutally honest form, its most rawest form. It's not a rage, it's just the inability to sit with a result that feels incomplete. It feels like something you ain't want. A loss is open ended, it requires resolution, and the only resolution you without boundaries can access is the only resolution you can access as a boundaryless trader is another trade, another attempt to close the loop, to make the session whole, to end on a good note, to restore a sense of order that was never established to begin with. I had to let that sink in for a moment. What you also do, neglect self-care in relationships. For example, the trading session extends beyond any reasonable boundary. The rest of life waits while the screen demands attention. The body is ignored. The relationships are deprioritized because there's no felt limit that says this is where the trading stops and the rest of life begins, and it has to be catered to. It has to be attended. A lack of boundaries with the self leads to sabotage on the charts. And it will always be that way. That will always be the fact. That fact ain't never gonna change. A lack of boundaries with the self leads to sabotage on the charts. This is not metaphorical. Structure you maintain around your process. The start time, the stop time, the max loss, the max trades per day, the daily limit loss. Those are not fucking like arbitrary rules. They're substitute. They're just a substitute for the internal structure that the environment never provided. They are the boundary, built deliberately, brick by an adult who understands what the child never learned. Now, the 10th pattern, and the final one, and perhaps the most fundamental one for anyone who works in financial markets, that is money trauma. The childhood root here. Well, before I even get to that, it's like this is probably one of the most common for a lot of us who grew up in impoverished upbringings. So the root here is scarcity. There's fear-based money dynamics, shame around wealth, an environment where money was consistently insufficient or inconsistently available or surrounded by conflict anxiety. It was either coming or going. Or conversely, an environment where wealth was present but treated with shame, where having money felt morally problematic, where the people around you spoke about wealth with like some sort of suspicion or resentment or guilt that money is the root of all evil type shit. Where money was just coming and going. There was no stableness when it came to money. It had two directions, coming or going. There was no sense of stability. Uh, I'm trying to find a good word for it. Well, to put it like this, both ends of this spectrum produce money trauma. Scarcity teaches that money is dangerous because there's not enough of it. Wealth, wealth shame, that teaches that money is dangerous because having too much of it makes you something wrong. Either way, the result is a person who has a disordered or a toxic relationship with money. Not at the level of financial literacy, but at the level of emotional safety. A person whom certain amounts of money in the account, certain levels of profit or loss, certain proximity to financial goals that triggers responses that have nothing to do with the market and everything to do with the original wound. In trading, this plays out in these following specific ways. Risk aversion. It becomes so extreme that it prevents execution. The trader who cannot risk even a defined rational percentage of their account because the felt experience of that money at risk is indistinguishable from the childhood experience of financial threat. You don't want to go back to feeling like you had none. You don't want to go back to that feeling of not, that feeling of loss, of just financial loss, knowing that, yo, survival is damn near a threat here. It has the same effect here. The loss of 1% of your capital feels like the potential loss of everything. Because in the formative years, financial loss often did mean the loss of everything, or at least it felt like it. You develop unworthiness of winning, or you experience that. You give back profits real fast, and this is one of the most painful patterns to witness, and one of the least discussed as far as I've experienced. For those of you who have a winning week, and then over the following days just systematically give it back. It's not from changed market conditions, it's not from strategy failure, but from an unconscious belief installed by the shame around wealth conditioning that this level of prosperity is not safe, it's not deserved, it's not sustainable for someone like them. Somewhere in the back of your mind, in that subconscious, money is not okay for you to have. Very overlooked, but it's prominent. And so the money comes in, and the nervous system reacts, not with satisfaction, but with anxiety, with the sense that something is wrong, that this cannot last, that it will be taken, and the behavior follows the feeling, not the plan. You see, avoidance of trading during good conditions is another pattern that those with money traumas experience. Those of you who step back precisely when the market is offering the most, the best, the highest probability. Those who find reasons not to trade on high opportunity days, who self sabotages the access to the very thing that they want. This is money trauma operating as a ceiling, a limit, an invincible cap on the amount of financial success the nervous system is willing to operate before it generates, how I say, does before it generates behavior designed to bring things back to the familiar level. So it's also what you believe about what you can have. And with money traumas, those with toxic relationships with money often subconsciously believe they're not capable of having much, or that they can't, or not no, not that they're not capable of having much, but also that they aren't. It's not okay to have much. There's this love hate relationship with money, again, that's toxic, that's unstable. The discipline of self love that I've written says my effort is not burden, it's proof. However, for a trader carrying money trauma, effort towards financial success is not clean. It's often complicated by everything the money has ever represented, by the fear, the shame, the scarcity, the guilt that came before the trading. And until that relationship is addressed, examined, and changed at the root level, the money will keep behaving in the account the same way it's behaved in the household. It came and it went. It came and it went. There was no stability. And through that, you learn that that's what just a relationship with money is finna be. Instability. Taking a sip of water real quick. So, now, here's something important that we haven't named directly yet. You see, almost no trader carries just one of these patterns. They carry combinations, multiple patterns from multiple sources. They're all operating simultaneously, as you can see here. Sometimes in the same direction, just like amplifying each other, feeding each other, like the validation seeking and learned helplessness, or abandonment issues and lack of boundaries. They're just amplifying each other. And sometimes, even in opposite directions, they're creating a paralysis that makes execution almost impossible to be inconsistent or impossible at all. If you have perfection, if you struggle with perfectionism and fear of failure, for example, that's being pulled in two different directions at once. Why? Because one program says, oh, take the trade, prove you can produce. Another says, nah, don't take it, you might be wrong. And so the internal conflict between these two programs generates uh, 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 like an internal conflict and anxiety that has nothing to do with the market and everything to do with the competing survival patterns or survival strategies of a child who needed to perform but was afraid of the consequences of imperfection. Or the trader with abandonment issues and learned helplessness, as I just said. One pattern says hold the losing trade. No, I said learned helplessness, and what was the other one? Validation seek. There we go. But you also have abandonment issues and learned helplessness. Like one pattern says, yo, hold the losing trade because you can't let it leave. You can't let that abandon you. You can't let your bias abandon you. Then you have the other pattern that says you can't trust your own judgment about whether to hold or fold. The result here becomes paralysis, or the outsourcing of the decision to an external voice, just rather trusting another voice, which then confirms the abandonment pattern when that voice turns out to be wrong. You see how it coincides? This is what the slide calls the compound effect of inner conflict. It's not linear. It's not linear at all. It's not one pattern causing one behavior. No, it's multiple patterns interacting, amplifying, conflicting, combining, creating emotional overload that produces the erratic, inconsistent, crash out behavior that most of you experience but cannot explain. The erratic day, the blow up day, that's not random. The inconsistency across sessions is not bad luck. It's a signature. It's a signature of unresolved inner conflict expressing itself through the only available outlet: your trades, your execution. And the burnout that eventually comes, the exhaustion that makes some of you walk away, some traders walk away entirely from trading. It's not the market wearing them out, but it's the internal friction of carrying this load, this baggage, session after session without addressing what's generating it. And they're just operating from it, never to cut off the root or even acknowledge the root. And this is why strategy upgrades don't solve the problem. Strategy hopping don't solve the problem. You can put, you could fucking, you could put a better engine in a car with no alignment and it still drives in circles. Put a, yo, put a V16, put a V20 if that exists in a Hellcat with unalignment, with misalignment. That shit's still gonna drift and it's never gonna drive straight. The compound effect of inner conflict is an alignment problem. And alignment requires inner work, not better setups. Now, I want to talk about the cycle because, again, it is a pattern. This is the most important structural insight in this entire lecture. And if you leave with nothing else today, just leave with this. The self sabotage cycle in trading is not a mystery. I said mastery, mystery. It's a loop, and it has identifiable setups or steps that run the same way every time until something interrupts it at the root. Step one, you have your trigger, a market situation that activates an emotional wound. This does not require a dramatic trade, a small loss, or a random or an ambiguous setup. A moment of missing a move, any of these can be the trigger. The market presents a condition that the nervous system recognizes as resembling the original threat. And from there, the pattern begins. It, the pattern reactivates. The program fires. And step two, you have is emotional reaction. Fear arises, or greed, or shame, or the urgency of abandonment, or the paralysis of perfectionism, or the urgency of patience, or the emotional response is generated by like the subconscious. It's not chosen, it's not invited, it's not consciously produced, it just simply arrives and it's already in the body, it's already shaping perception before the conscious mind has processed what happened. Step three, you have impulsive action. The trading decision gets made, and it's not from the strategy, it's not from the plan, not from the process, but from the emotional state. The emotional state decided the move, or the emotional state called the shot. The stop does not get taken. The revenge trade goes in. The winner gets closed early. The size, the risk goes up. The contract sizing goes up. Lots, whatever. The session extends past the defined limit. You're past your daily loss limit. Still trading. Each of these is the emotional wound and control of the execution. Using the trade as the outlet for what it cannot express any other way. I hope that makes sense. Step 4, you have the negative outcome. The trade confirms the fear. The loss reinforces the shame. The missed exit reinforces the belief that good things don't last. The account reflects that pattern. The inconsistent capital reflects the inconsistent execution. And the outcome lands as confirmation of whatever the original wound was already certain was true. Then shame and regret. You review and you see the pattern. You know what happened. You can't fully explain why. The shame of the pattern, the frustration of knowing better and doing differently compounds the original wound. So there's more emotional charge there. Then there's reinforced identity. The loss doesn't just cost money. No, it provides evidence as well. Evidence for the story that was already running beneath the surface. Oh, I always do this. Oh, I can't control myself. I'm not cut out for this trading shit. I'm too emotionally unstable for this. I can't control myself. The identity hardens around the pattern. So the story gets reinforced, or the story gains evidence, and that reinforces the identity. It reinforces or enhances the negative self talk because now you got evidence to prove the self talk, to back it up. So the next session, the next day you trade, that begins with that identity already in place. So you're not even in the right state of mind. Then the loop repeats itself. The trigger arrives again. The same program fires, the same behavior follows, the same outcome confirms the same identity the next day. So this cycle keeps repeating until the underlying emotional pattern is addressed at its root. Not managed at the surface, not papered over with new rules, another strategy. Addressed at the root. That's the only way through. The root is the way through. No rule system can break this loop. Rules operate at the level of behavior. This loop operates at the level of wiring. This is beyond behavior. This is before that. You can't govern your way out of a trauma response. You can't do that. You can only do the work that changes what the nervous system responds to. And so now it's like, okay, how do we break it? What do we do about it? You know the problem. How do you solve the problem? First, I want to be clear about what's breaking it, what breaking it does not look like. It doesn't look like adding more rules to your process and expanding them, expecting them to hold. Again, rules operate at the level of behavior. See, rules are conscious. The cycle is subconscious though. Under pressure, the subconscious wins, and you already notice. You've experienced this. We're not finna sit here and act like you don't. It don't look like trying harder to control the behavior in the moment. In the moment, the program is already running. The pattern is already live. The emotional response has already been generated. The conscious mind is already compromised. So trying to exercise willpower inside of an active trauma response is like it's like trying to steer a car after the wheels already came off. Like, my nigga, you ain't gonna get nowhere. So breaking the cycle requires working at the level of the root, the emotional patterns that are wired into the subconscious, reprogramming them, not suppressing them, not managing them, replacing them with new patterns through repetition, awareness, evidence, deliberate behavioral change over time. Over time is a key word, and I'm going to talk about that soon. So this is the work. It's not quick, it's not uncomfortable, or it's not comfortable, sorry. It's not quick and it isn't comfortable, nor is it easy. but it is absolutely available to every person in this call, in this class. The following slides will walk through the 5 steps of that work, and I want to move through it with each one with enough depth that you leave today not just knowing they exist, but understanding what they actually, the effort they require of you. So to put it like this, you see, to break the self-sabotage loop, you must stop treating symptoms and start addressing the root cause. It's like when you go to the doctor and they give you treatments for the pain, but it's not curing the actual illness at hand. It's just making the pain bearable. So when it comes to the self sabotage loop, you have to address the root here. The symptoms are the bad trades, the inconsistent execution, the terrible execution. The root cause is the emotional programming behind the bad trades, the bad execution. Treat the root, the symptoms resolve on its own. All you have to worry about is the root. That's all. Does that make sense? Appreciate you, amen. I'll catch you on next week or whenever. Do we get access to this slide? I will send it through after this. So, step 1, awareness. It's the first step. It sounds simple, but it's not. Real awareness, the kind that can actually interrupt the subconscious pattern, that's not intellectual. It's not reading about the pattern in a book and recognizing it abstractly. No, it is the specific granular, honest practice of tracking your emotional experience in real time and connecting it, bridging the gap trade by trade to the patterns we have been naming today. Track emotional triggers. This requires that during and after every trade, especially every trade that deviates from your plan, your system, you note what you were feeling. Not what you were thinking, what you were feeling. The tightness in the chest, the urgency in the hands, the desire to close the trade that arrived before the exit signal presented itself. The hesitance to enter that arrived despite the setup being clean. These body sensations are the language of the subconscious. They are what the pattern feels like from the inside. So learn to track the triggers. 2, journal deeply. Not the surface journal, not just, oh, I took a loss, I need to do better. No, the deeper question is, what was I feeling before this mistake? Not just after, but before. What was the emotional state going into the session? What happened in the body the moment the deviation from the system occurred? What did the feeling remind you of? Where else have you felt it? Then you have identity wounds. This is the step that requires the most courage. When you have tracked the feeling and asked where else it lives and where it lies, the answer will often point somewhere earlier. The urgency you felt when you revenge traded, when have you felt that urgency before? The reluctance to take the stop. What does the feeling of loss remind you of? The compulsion to share the trade before entering. What were you looking for in that moment? There's the root. And so a good way to find roots of these wounds is continue to ask why. Follow the trail of why. Okay, I was fearful. Why? Why was I? But you have to, like, how do I say? You have to answer it with specific or answers that lead you deeper, not answers that remain at the surface. So when you ask yourself, okay, I was fearful. Why was I fearful? Because I didn't want to lose. Why didn't you want to lose? Or why didn't I want to lose? Because I wanted to be great. Why did I want to be great? Because I always wanted to be great. It's like these things are not actually leading you to the root. Whereas if you ask yourself, okay, why was I fearful? I was fearful because I had a desire or an attachment to winning the trade. And okay, why was I attached to winning the trade? I have uh I've experienced difficulty allowing or accepting the market as it is without my control. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Why do you feel you have to be in control? Because as a kid, I felt I wasn't in control. When was the first time you didn't feel in control as a kid? Oh, it was when so and so happened. Now you're getting to the root, following the trail of whys. Keep asking why. And you follow the trail, question answer by answer. You're getting a step closer to the root, and allow your subconscious to answer these questions for you. Don't try to, like, how I say, rationally or intellectually involve yourself in this conversation. Allow what comes up to come up. It's going to come up when it needs to. And so the emotional trade log as well. I would say it's the most powerful tool in this step. Not P&L, not setup, notes or all of that, but a log that tracks what you felt, what you said to yourself, and what the physical experience of the trade was. Read that log across a week, a month, and the patterns will become undeniable. You can see the data for yourself. But the thing about awareness here is that you can't change what you have not clearly seen. Awareness is not the solution, it's just a prerequisite for every solution that follows afterwards. Hence why it's the first step. Step two, emotional regulation. The second step here, I want to be very precise about what this means because it's widely misunderstood. Emotional regulation is not suppression, and I feel that's what a lot of people make it seem to be. It's not telling yourself to calm down. It's not fucking like white knuckling your way through an emotionally activated state and then hoping the behavior doesn't follow the feeling. No. Emotional regulation is the active practice of returning the nervous system from an activated state to a state of leveled out equilibrium. It's the physiological intervention. And it works because the reason it works is because the nervous system responds to specific inputs, such as breath, sensory grounding, physical presence, in predictable ways. Here you got it right here, the 4-7-8 breath technique. 4 counts inhale, 7 counts hold, 8 counts exhale. It's not decorative, it's not no aesthetic shit. The extend exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system. The rest and digest state that is the, how would I say, it's that rest and digest state that's the physiological opposite of the fight or flight response. When the pattern fires and the body goes into activation, the breath is the fastest available intervention. Yes, it works, but only if it's practiced before the pressure arrives. Because under extreme activation, the will to use the technique is often the first thing that goes out the window. Also, you have the 3-minute reset after a loss, before the next trade, before the review, before anything. 3 minutes of conscious, deliberate, non engagement with the market. No stimulus. This is not optional recovery time. No, it's the interruption of the trigger, the impulsive response loop at its most vulnerable point. That moment where you know you tight as fuck after that loss and you want to get back in, even though you hit your daily loss max limit or your daily trade limit. Take that 3-minute reset to recenter. That's the moment between the lost and the next decision. Very important. That's like the moment that determines whether you going to follow through with a crash out or hold true to your system and walk away when your system says to walk away. Also, you have the five senses check. Name five things you can see, four things you can hear, three things you can feel, two things you can smell. What's the other fifth? One thing you can taste. This is a grounding technique. It pulls the nervous system from the abstract threat of the past or future and into the concrete reality of the present moment. It's like kind of zooming out. It's like retrospect shit. It works by demanding the sensory cortex's attention, which competes with and interrupts the threat response loop. So here is where you can intervene and not follow, not impulsively act on losses or emotional activation. Understand something. Presence is the highest form of power. It's your true edge. We're not seduced by speed. We are anchored in awareness. That's the fourth law of Soire, and it's practically implemented not philosophically, inspired to, but through exactly this. This is the kind of deliberate physiological intervention that I speak of when I talk about this fourth law. Breath techniques, minute reset, senses check. This is to ground yourself. Practice breathing, mindfulness, body scans. And it doesn't even have to be before entering a trade, but do these things throughout your day because there may be other parts of your day. It's like you can't just be emotion regulated for just trading. No, this requires you to show up the same way for all parts, all factors in your life, all parts, family, business, work, relationships, whatever. Allow this to leak in your life or allow this to spread equally through your life. Step three. This is reprogramming the subconscious. And this is where I want to depart slightly from the framing on the slide because I do not believe that affirmations in the conventional sense do the work that this step requires. So let me explain what reprogramming actually means. The subconscious learns through repetition and emotion, not through the conscious recitation of statements, through repeated experience. And that's kind of what I've learned to it's what I've learned to see a year later after originally lecturing this exact same slide. Again, I've come to learn that the subconscious learns through repetition and emotion, but not through conscious recitation of statements, aka affirmations, through repeated experiences, especially emotionally charged ones, that establish new patterns to replace the old ones. So, programming is not saying, oh, I am a disciplined trader who respects my system in the mirror each morning. This is not nothing, but it is not sufficient by itself. Reprogramming is the accumulation of actual experiences of disciplined trading, of taking the stop, of following the plan, of not revenge trading, of sitting in the discomfort of the open position and not closing it early despite wanting to. Each of these experiences repeated enough times and accompanied by the emotional registration or the emotional declarance of I did that deposits new data into the subconscious record. And so that's new evidence that the old survival program is no longer the only option. So for those of you who couldn't keep up, essentially what I'm saying is affirmations alone is not the solution here. It's evidence backing up the affirmation that does something. Not just getting on the mirror and saying, I'm a strong motherfucker. No, you go out and prove that you are. Gather evidence that you are. You say and you do. No, it's not you say and you don't do. No, the both have to. The both have to work in coherence and alignment with each other. Visualization, done properly, can accelerate this. Not by imagining success, but by repeatedly rehearsing the specific moment of challenge and seeing yourself respond with the new behavior. Visualize the worst case scenario and your response to it. That's a stoic perspective. That's what I often do. Visualize the trade going against me and me responding in a calm manner, a regulated manner, responding accordingly to my system. I'm gonna take my loss. Not, I guess you could say like a man, but take my loss according to the system. I lose, I lose. That's fine. But that ain't gonna dictate nothing else. And so the brain, during visualization, it processes vivid mental rehearsal in the same neural pathways as actual experience. A lot of manifestation coaches talk about this. I believe Dr. Joe Dispenza speaks on this as well. But repeated visualization of staying disciplined under pressure it's not no like pipe dream wishful thinking. No, it's practice. Repeated visualization of staying of remaining structured under pressure or when things are going wrong. Remaining consistent in your execution. Visualization of remaining consistent in your execution despite a losing streak or probabilities not working in your favor for a week or for some days. It's practice. It's not wishful thinking. Also, you have belief rewriting. That is the conscious identification of the specific statement the wound is running. Oh, I always blow up. I'm not a real trader. I don't deserve to succeed. And the deliberate replacement of that statement with something grounded in evidence. In evidence. Not positive spin, but evidence. The last 12 trades, I took every stop cleanly. I took my loss as smooth as possible. That is a belief rewriting statement. It's not aspirational, but it's factual. It's factory facts repeated in the presence of emotional acknowledgement. That can gradually shift the operating belief within the subconscious. Because again, you have evidence. It's grounded in evidence. So it's not no like delusional positive spin. And so to understand or to kind of conclude it, repetition plus emotion equals neural rewiring. That is simply the formula. Do the behavior, feel the evidence of having done it, and repeat it over and over and over and over. As I said earlier, the subconscious learns through repetition and emotion. And this is how you teach it. This is how you train it. This is how you reprogram it. Now, with step 3 out the way, step 4, rebuild boundaries and systems. This is where the inner work meets the structural work, where what has been realized about the self gets translated into, how I say, the practical architecture of the trading process. If that makes sense. And so you have things like time boundaries. Trade only within a predefined session window. Not because the market isn't moving outside of it, but because the boundary itself is the practice. Every time you honor the session end, even when the market is active, even when the position is tempting, even when the loss from the session is unresolved and you want to get back in, you are performing an act of self-governance. You are demonstrating to the subconscious that the structure holds, that what you said and what you committed to is law, that you are capable of limits, that the rules you set for yourself are real and they're worthy and respected enough to be followed. Also, risk boundaries. A defined daily loss limit and an emotional drawdown limit. Let me kind of like define the drawdown limit, the emotional drawdown limit. I would say that's the one most traders skip, and it is the more important of the two because the emotional drawdown limit is essentially the internal threshold, the point at which you know your emotional state has degraded to the point where execution quality has downgraded or it's been compromised. It requires honest, very honest self monitoring. It requires acknowledging that you're not in a state to trade. And it requires the discipline to honor that acknowledgement, even when the financial pressure to continue is present, it's real. Also, emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries, very important. The rituals that create separation between you and the chart. The pre-market routine that establishes the internal state before market exposure. The post-session closure practice that ends the trading day with a defined act, I would say. Not just closing the platform, not just closing TradingView or whatever broker you're trading, but doing something that signals to the nervous system that this session is complete. That's it. I'm closing a book today. The system before screen checklist is not, it's not, what's the word? It's not bureaucracy. It's a pre-commitment device. A structure built in calm that governs behavior and chaos. The version of you that builds the checklist and the version that executes in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the session, are different versions. So the checklist is written by the calm version for the activated one. So honor that. That was step 4. Step 5. I would consider, I went a little too deep. I would consider this to be the deepest one. And here's why. How will I say? This would also be the step most traders are willing to take because it requires acknowledging that the work is not just about trading. It's also about the person doing the trading. Like, it's much easier to do technical work than to do inner healing work. It's much easier to backtest than it is to backtrack internally. It's much easier to fix your technical strategy. It's much easier to fix technicals than it is to fix trauma. It is to fix childhood conditioning. So that's why I say most traders are least willing to take this step. First would be professional support, therapy, particularly like trauma informed approaches. It can address these patterns at a level that self help and trading psychology alone cannot reach. You also have internal family systems. That is particularly relevant here because it provides a framework for working with the different parts of the psyche that, how I say, are operating in conflict. The part that wants to follow the rules, the part that is terrified of loss, the part that needs to prove something. Those are not just metaphors. They're identifiable psychological structures, and they can be worked with directly. Also, shadow work. The parts of yourself that you have not been willing to acknowledge, the greed, the shame, the fear, the guilt, the rage that sits under the revenge trade. These parts do not go away when they're ignored, when they're suppressed, when they're neglected. They go underground, and from underground, they run the behavior. Shadow work is the practice of bringing them into the conscious awareness, bringing them to the surface, integrating them. Not eliminating them, but no longer allowing them to operate without supervision. You also have, what's this? Inner child work. This is about, well, I wouldn't say it's about regression or sentimentality. It's about acknowledging with compassion rather than judgment, harshness, that the patterns being described today were not chosen by a weak or undisciplined adult. They were installed in a child who was doing the best they could with an environment they did not choose. Nigga, you ain't choose the environment you grew up in. So you just made the best with what you could have. And for that, you can't fault yourself. But it is your responsibility to heal that. And so giving that acknowledgement to yourself, not as an excuse, but again, as an honest accounting of where the patterns came from, is part of what allows them to loosen, is what allows you to process through a portion or a good portion of the emotional charge that comes from these patterns and these conditionings. As the slide says, you don't eliminate sabotage by adding rules. No, you eliminate it by integrating the parts of you that are scared. That is the work, not the comfortable work, the real work. I've been on here for a minute. Now, turning healing into habit. I want to make something clear. Breakthroughs without integration are just expensive experiences. This is important to name directly because the trading psychology space is full of moments of insight that do not produce lasting change. The session where everything clicked, the book that changed the way you saw yourself, the realization that a specific pattern has been running for years. These moments are valuable, but they're not sufficient. So integration means embedding. I'm trying to think of this. I'm trying to okay. Integration means embedding the work into the daily structure of your trading life. Not as an occasional practice, not as something you return to after a particularly bad week, but as a consistent, non-negotiable element of the process. That's what that is. With the same status as your entries, your risk parameters, your setup criteria. So, through this, there's self-compassion after losses, not as not as like a means of consoling yourself, but as a deliberate practice that interrupts the shame cycle before it can reinforce the negative identity or the destructive self-talk. The loss happened. It is data. That's it. It is data. And the human being who made the decision deserves the same basic dignity that you would extend to anyone else who tried and fell short. Compassion for trying. So withholding that dignity does not improve future performance, but it compounds the wound. Present awareness through regular mindfulness. Not as a spiritual practice if that's not relevant to you, but as a cognitive tool, because it is a very effective one, a useful one, The ability to notice when a subconscious program has activated and the pattern is about to repeat itself. To name the emotional state that is present, to create even a 1 second gap between the trigger and the response. Because what happens with these subconscious conditionings is that, or these subconscious patterns, is that there is no gap between the impulse and the action. They are one and the same. So soon as you're activated off of the impulse, you're moving. So to create the gap is what present awareness does. That gap is where everything lives. And that gap, choice becomes available. Without that gap, there's no choice, there's no intervention. The cycle is just repeating itself with no resistance. Also, emotional check ins. As part of the trading plan, before every session, a brief internal, like, inventory or a check in. Not a performance review, but a state check. What is present today? Is sadness present today? Is nervousness present today? Is anxiety present today? What am I carrying into this session from yesterday, from this week, from this morning? Is there anything here that needs to be acknowledged before I open a chart? Breakthroughs. The thing about breakthroughs is that they don't last without integration. Mastery is not a moment. Mastery is a habit, and habits are built by showing up for the practice with the same consistency you bring into the chart. I hope that makes sense. Just taking a sip of water here. Now, I want to give you a picture of where this work leads, not as an ideal to be achieved perfectly, but as a direction. You need that. A North Star, something you can orient toward and measure progress against. The healed trader trusts their system without chasing or hesitating, and it's not because the system is perfect, but because the trader's relationship with imperfection has changed. You've done the work to know that good process over a large sample produces results. And you trust that the mathematics, you trust the mathematics enough to execute the process cleanly, session after session, without the anxiety of needing each individual trade to confirm them. That's the thing. The healed trader takes losses with grace, with acceptance. Like, yo, this is just the cost of doing business. This is just a business expense. Every business comes with expenses. The loss in this strategy is just the cost of this. It's a business expense. It's the cost of running this strategy. Every strategy has a cost to run them. For whatever system you have, your losses is just the cost of running that. Reframe. And so, again, taking losses with grace without spiraling into self blame, negative self talk. A loss is closed. The journal is updated with what can be learned. The session ends. Tomorrow begins with a clean slate. The loss does not carry forward into the identity. It doesn't become a story. Oh, I don't know how to win, or I suck at this trading shit, or I'm never going to be good enough. It doesn't become that kind of story or a story about who the trader is. It's just simply, very simply, a data point in a long series of data points. And it will be accounted for by the edge over time. What the hill trader also does is separate self-worth from P&L and performance metrics. The account balance goes up and down, but the trader's worth does not. Your worth stays the same. Like, those dots are, worth and performance metrics are not connected. And not because you as a trader has declared them disconnected, but because the work has been done to build an identity not dependent that is not dependent on financial performance and result for its foundation. The identity is built on process, on consistency, on composure, on execution, the daily proof of showing up and executing the standard. At the end of the day, that is all you can control. You can't control market movement. You can't control whether you win or lose today unless you pussy out and close your trade early, which is against your system 9 times out of 10. You see, the healed trader responds to triggers thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively. The patterns still activate. We're not going to act like it's not there. The nervous system still generates the old response, but the gap between trigger and action has been widened through awareness, regulation, and repetition to the point where the response is chosen rather than automatic. And that's where you know there was real difference made. Embodying mastery, trading from wholeness. This is not a destination, it's a practice. It's a daily and active, deliberate practice that begins the moment you decide that the work inside the self is as important as the work on the chart. The self, the psychology is just as important as the technical, or even more important because it's the cause to your execution. It's the prerequisite to your execution. So it's like no matter how good your technicals was, if the self is not primed for optimal execution, there will never be optimal execution. So, yo, how many slides I got in this, bro? I've been on this for a minute. I forgot I had this many slides. God damn. Mastering the market begins within. How do I say? Okay. Here's the summary of everything we've covered today, stated as plainly as I know how to state it. You don't need a better setup. You don't need a better setup. You need a better relationship with yourself. This ain't no inspirational, motivational talk. No, it's a practical statement. The setups you already have, if you're executing them with emotional interference, with unprocessed trauma driving the decisions, with subconscious programs overriding the plan, those setups will continue to underperform. Not because they're bad setups, but because the person executing them is not free. They're still enslaved, still ran by their subconscious conditioning, childhood trauma, these patterns. Your risk tolerance is not limited by your financial capacity. It's limited by your emotional regulation capacity. The amount of risk you can hold comfortably in a trade, in a session, across a week of like drawdown, that is a direct function of your nervous system's, how I say, regulatory capacity. Developing that capacity does not come from reading about risk management. Fuck no. It comes from the work we've been describing today. Your drawdowns are mirrors of your unconscious belief systems. When you look at a drawdown period, a losing streak, or a sustained one, a sustained drawdown period, a repetitive one, and ask, what story is this telling? The answer is usually not in the market. It's in the pattern, and the pattern has a source, and it's your responsibility to cut the source, fix the root. And so I say this all the time, like, your greatest trading edge is internal. It's not found in indicators. It's not a setup. It's not a time of day. It's not an indicator configuration. The edge that compounds across a career is psychological sovereignty. This is your best edge. This is the best edge. The most effective. This will truly make a change. Strategy hopping ain't gonna fix the issue. The relationship with yourself will. The ability to execute your process smoothly, consistently, under the full range of market conditions without the internal interference that we've been naming today. That is your best trading edge. So it's like, ask yourself, what part of you is still trading from fear, pain, or the need to prove something? And who do you become when you trade from wholeness? Imagine, think about the version of you that's whole. How much different would you trade from who you are today? And how much more effective would your execution, or optimal would your execution become if you traded from a place of wholeness? You traded from a place of sovereignty. Those are the questions that this lecture was designed to leave you with. Not the answers, because you're going to find the answers in the work, but the questions held honestly and pursued diligently will take you somewhere that no setup, no strategy, and no system ever could. Does that make sense? So, I believe you had two more slides. Yes, we do. I want to close the content of this session with something intentional, not as an affirmation exercise, but as a moment of declaration, serious declaration, of stating clearly in your own voice the direction you are committing to from this point forward. So I want you to repeat after me and say this with conviction. I need some comments here that you are ready. I want you to repeat after me. Are you ready? Okay, perfect. These four statements on the slide, I'm going to read them and I'm again ask you to say them after me. Not loudly, not performatively, but with conviction, with full internal conviction. Say them to yourself if speaking out loud feels wrong, but mean it. Number one, I am a disciplined and sovereign trader. My emotions are signals, not commands. This is the foundational reframe, not the absence of emotion, but the right relationship with it. The emotion arrives, it is observed, not obeyed. Number two, I trade from stillness, not from fear. I release what no longer serves my strategy. You see, stillness is not inactivity. It is the internal state from which clean execution is possible. And release is not forgetting. It is the deliberate choice to not carry forward what belongs in the past. Number three, I pause, breathe, and act with clarity. I forgive the parts of me that acted in fear. The pause is where the gap lives. The breath is the physiological intervention, and the forgiveness, this is the piece most traders skip. The part of you that moved the stop, that revenge traded, that crashed out, that held the losing position. That part was doing what it knew to do based on the programming it was given. Forgiveness is not absolution, it is release. It is the act of closing the loop so the shame does not feed the next cycle. Number four, I let go of the need to force results. I am not my past. I am the awareness that chooses my future. This last one is most important. You are not the pattern. You are the one who can see the pattern. And whatever you can see clearly enough to name, you can choose whether to follow. Markets expose what you refuse to face. Mastering the market is impossible until you master yourself. Understood? Perfect. So, as my last slide, here are some books that I recommend, resources. I want to point you towards these resources that are directly relevant to the work we've discussed today. Not as a reading list, but as a prescription. Think of it as if it's a prescription. These 3 books, engaged with seriously and honestly, will do more for your trading than most things you could spend money on in this space. The first is Letting Go by David R. Hawkins. Uh, I've done a book study on this for some time. I didn't get through the entire book. I am going to be resuming that once I create my own Discord, which I will be doing this weekend, I believe. This book offers one of the most practically useful frameworks for emotional intelligence I have encountered thus far. The core of it is simple but rarely practiced. The practice of allowing emotions to arise fully and releasing them, not suppressing them, not acting them out, but allowing them to complete their natural arc without interference, letting your emotions run through you, teaching you to let go of what no longer soothes you, and teaches you to respond, not react. The second is Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke. This book goes to the neurochemical root of impulsive behavior, of the pull towards immediate gratification, the compulsion to act when the discomfort of waiting becomes intolerable. See, Anna's work here, Lemke's work here on dopamine regulation is directly applicable to the impatience pattern and just overall incompetence when it comes to this space. And also the overall leveraging pattern as well. And the over trading pattern. Understanding the neurochemistry of your own impulses here, that's not like no academic rocket science exercise. No, it is a practical intelligence about why your nervous system behaves the way it does and what you can do to regulate it. That's the second prescription. The third prescription is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is the Gregory Hayes translation, which is, I would say, the easiest to read. Uh, this is the foundation, the Stoic operating system from which much of Soire draws. Soire stands for silence of impulse, rational execution. And it's my personal philosophy or way of life that I've been following for about a year. And I've been refining and I've been living in, practicing in, basing my sense of self mastery or my framework for self mastery in that. And so Aurelius writes not as a philosopher removed from the pressures of real consequence, but as a man at the center of the most high stakes environment in ancient Rome, working daily to remain sovereign in his own mind in the face of everything he could not control. So the emphasis on what is within your domain and your control and what is not. The discipline of not outsourcing your internal state to external events. The practice of owning your reality completely, without victimhood, without excuse, and responding to it from the clearest version of yourself. This isn't Stoic theory. No, this is the practice, and it translates directly to the market. There's things you can control and things you cannot. These are not books to collect. They're books to work through, slowly, honestly, and with the journal open beside you. The return on that investment, the ROI for this prescription, will show up in your charts. So, now that that's the last slide, I do want to close with this. Everything we covered today can feel heavy. The patterns, the roots, the compound effect of carrying unprocessed history into a high stakes environment. It can feel like a lot to hold. I get it. And I want to say clearly the weight of this, of all of this, is not an indictment. It's, how I say, it's an inventory. An inventory is not judgment, it's just simply information. It tells you what is present, what needs attention, what needs solution, what has been there all along without a name, without true awareness. And a named thing is a thing that can be worked with. A named pattern is one you can see coming. A named wound is one you can see, is one you can begin to address. You came into trading carrying everything you came into life carrying. This was not a choice. The work that this lecture is pointing towards, that is the choice. Every single day you sit down to trade, you have the option to bring more awareness, more regulation, more honest self-examination to the process than you did the day before. And all that is evidence. Evidence of an internal uptrend. That compound interest pays out differently than the P&L. It's slower in the beginning, but it's permanent in the long run. For those of you who do this work, the real work, the inner work, you become someone the market cannot break. Not because you no longer feel fear or greed or the pull of the old patterns, but because you've built enough internal architecture that those patterns no longer have unilateral control over your execution. And that is what mastery actually looks like. Not the absence of the wound, but the presence of something stronger. So I want to end this off by saying, the markets expose what you refuse to face, so face it. Deliberately. With honesty. With the understanding that what is being revealed is not a verdict, it's an invitation. An invitation to become the trader and the person that the work produces. So go do the work. Understood.